My role for the day will be to be speaking to political parties ahead of the speech today. That is, of course, if there is a speech, because this is the question that I have been asked by numerous people this entire week. Let me just speak to the national spokesperson of the EFF, Sinawo Tambo. First of all, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the actual speech, do you believe a speech will be delivered today?
I think so. I think there's no further option but to present the proposed fiscal framework and revenue proposal, which is the budget speech being proposed by Enoch Godongwana today. Otherwise, I think the market uncertainty will be tragic, the rand will be affected massively, and it will show further deep divisions and incompetency by the government of national unity. So it has to be proposed today. There's no other option to do so, because South Africa can't keep waiting.
So what we've heard is that there hasn't been there's no consensus yet. There's a cabinet meeting sitting right now, I believe, or it might be sitting soon. There's no consensus. Can you forecast, for instance, if all GNU parties don't agree on what the budget speech looks like today, what could the outcome of that be?
Look, the presumption that the parties which form part of cabinet have to agree on the budget proposal in order for us as a nation to move forward is extremely misplaced. They are not the final arbiters of whether a budget gets passed or not. Parliament is. So whether they agree or not is neither here nor there and should never be the focal point of what needs to happen in South Africa. They must come out of that meeting with their agreements or disagreements. It's none of our concern. They must propose the budget to the Parliament of South Africa, which is constituted by elected people, and it is Parliament that must take a decision whether it accepts or rejects that budget. And one of the options available to us through the legislation of the Money Amendments Procedure and Related Matters Act, which was adopted in 2009, is that we can actually amend the proposed fiscal framework and revenue proposal. So it is a mere proposal, and the conception that what Treasury formulates and what is presented by what is essentially a bookkeeper and Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, is something that is set in stone, is completely and legislatively incorrect. They must propose the budget. We must go through it as parliamentarians and as political parties. If, for example, the DA is true to its word that it's rejecting an increase in VAT, must come to the table and sit with other opposition parties and draft necessary amendments, especially as it relates to taxation, to ensure that there's no increase that affects the poor negatively.
Sinawo, I know that this was discussed 2 weeks ago when we were here, but just to remind our viewers again, what would an ideal budget speech look like for your party?
Look, for us, there has to be an emphasis on how there's going to be creation of jobs. And the proposed budget that was not ultimately delivered in Parliament a couple of weeks ago said nothing specific or concrete towards creation of jobs or towards a growth plan to grow our economy. The only thing this budget seems to do is re-emphasize the fact that we have $1 billion in debt service costs a day and projected 440 million annually from 2026 to 2027. It doesn't tell us how it's going to ensure that there's necessary allocations to improve healthcare and education in South Africa. So there must be an emphasis on how you're going to create jobs and an emphasis on how you're going to cap the decline of projected economic growth. I mean, now the projections have gone from 1.8% in projected increases of economic growth to 0.8, which is tragic and shows that there's no economic planning involved in the office of the Minister of Finance or Treasury. They are focused on taxation. They are focused on emphasizing public-private partnerships as a mechanism to generate economic growth, and this is not proven to work in South Africa and has only resulted in the growth of the private sector. So we want a jobs and growth-orientated budget, and anything outside of that will represent a continued failure on Treasury's part. And as parliamentarians, it's time for us to take responsibility and not only reject but amend this budget, as is our legislative right to do so.
Sinawo Tambo, thank you so much for your time. That was the EFF national spokesperson, Sinawo Tambo, who interestingly said if the DA is true to its word and if it doesn't agree with this budget, they are willing to sit and have a talk with him about how they think the budget should look. I'm now going to be crossing back to the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Abra Barbier, and interesting sentiments there from the EFF, but also the Finance Minister being doorstopped there by Bulelani Philip and saying that he will deliver that budget speech. But of course, it is what happens after that that will be of a great interest as well.